In 1997, when you delivered the Kosambi lectures at Bombay University, you again broke very radical ground on two important historical narratives, Somnatha and Shakuntala. They also then resulted in two different books. Now, just the two narratives, if you could explain, because it was very important. One is the early medieval period, the other one is the early Indian period, and is the whole issue of gender and how Shakuntala is looked at. If you could just say a few words about both those narratives.
The Somnath book, I must say that I was myself very intrigued as I went from one set of sources to another, because we have grown up on the theory, which comes from the Turco-Persian chronicles, that he came, he desecrated the temple, he broke the idol, and that was the beginning of the Hindu trauma. That is the way these chronicles were interpreted. When I looked at the chronicles, and since I don't know Persian, I asked the help of a colleague of mine who has excellent Persian, and we went through them. The interesting thing was that they contradicted each other.
The chronicles.
The chronicles. They're really not quite sure what he broke. Did he break a lingam? Did he break an image? Because at one stage they talk about him piercing the belly of the image, and a whole bunch of precious stones fell out of the belly. In the case of the lingam, one man says it's on the ground, the other man says it's suspended, because they had a magnet in the ceiling and they placed the lingam on an iron bar, so the whole thing was suspended. Now, can you imagine a magnet that would be able to suspend a stone lingam? But never mind. And so this goes on. There's another lovely story about how the image was actually the image of an Arabian, a goddess who was worshipped in Arabia called Manat. There were three goddesses, and Muhammad had said very clearly, you people must stop worshipping these goddesses because they're pre-Islamic. Lat, Uzza, and Manat. And one of the chroniclers says that this was actually the image of Manat that was brought to Somnath for safekeeping from Muhammad, and was being worshipped, and therefore Mahmud of Ghazni was very anxious to destroy it, because he would get the acclaim of having finally destroyed the third goddess that needed to be destroyed. So I was very intrigued by the fact that they don't agree. The descriptions
within the chronicles.
Within the chronicles, they don't agree. All right. Then I went to the Sanskrit inscriptions, which people hadn't gone to earlier, because we were all brought up on the idea that the Hindu period comes to an end in 1200. And so you use Sanskrit sources to 1200, and after that you only use Persian sources. So even if you have Sanskrit sources, you don't use them, because somehow, you know, in the medieval period you only use Persian sources. So I started looking at the Sanskrit inscriptions, and they're fascinating inscriptions, because a lot of them deal with the temple of Somnath, its estates. And we're now into the 12th, 13th century. The traders, there's a Persian trader called Nuruddin who comes and has a legal contract drawn up with the local traders about getting land to build a mosque. And some of the land is from the Somnath estate.
And it's given to him?
And it's given to him to build a mosque, because the mosque is referred to as a dharmasthana.
And this is 200 years after?
This is 200 years after the raid. All right. So you have that. And then later on you have more inscriptions where the chief priest of the Somnath Temple is doing deals with all these traders, as in fact in many of these wealthy temples, trade was one of the activities. I mean, quite apart from the religious activity, this was a side activity. Anyways, there was all that. Then I looked at the Jain chronicles, 14th century, early 15th century, 14th century, which are the one chronicle in particular, which is the history of the Chalukya dynasty, where it describes why Kumarapala decided to restore the temple of Somnath, which he does. And the reason that is given is very interesting. There's no mention of Mahmud. The temple is restored because it was dilapidated, and it was dilapidated because of two reasons. One is that the local ministers were wicked and didn't take any trouble to restore it and keep it in good condition. And the other was that it's on the shore and the sea spray came and weathered the temple. So the temple was restored. And I was kind of bothered about this, and I thought, you know, this is so different from the story that is generally told.
And part of the nationalist narrative
Absolutely. Yeah. So then somebody, one of my colleagues said, why don't you follow up the debate in the House of Commons? And I said, what was that about? And I was told that the Viceroy, the then Viceroy, had asked the then commander of the army, who was fighting the war in Afghanistan, to bring back from Ghazni the gates of the Somnath Temple, the wooden gates of the Somnath Temple that Mahmud of Ghazni had looted and taken back and had put in on the entrance of his own mausoleum. The gates came back to Agra, they were brought back, and when people looked at them, they realized there was nothing Indian about them, they were Egyptian. So there was a huge debate in the House of Commons with people saying, the early 19th century, with members of parliament saying, what is this Viceroy up to? Why is he wasting money doing this kind of silly thing? Who is he appeasing, the Hindus or the Muslims? And in the course of that debate, they started talking about the Hindu trauma at the destruction of the Somnath Temple. That is the first time that you get references.
during colonial, so it's like colonial historiography.
Yeah, yeah, it's an invention of that debate. And then, of course, it's picked up, and it's picked up by various people here, like A.M. Munshi, who is a great protagonist of the idea that there was a Hindu trauma and so on. And this whole issue ends up with the destruction of the Babri Masjid to avenge the raid of Mahmud of Ghazni.
It's a tragedy.
And then, you know, I called it the many voices of a history because each of these sets of sources gives you a different version of the story. It's also something like, one of my colleagues said this to me, he said it's like the story of Rashomon, the Japanese film.
Yeah.
The murder is committed and there's 6 people who each give a
Interprets it.
completely different interpretation of what happened. And I've left it open in the sense that I've said, well, you know, here is a situation that let's wait for more evidence to find out what exactly happened. But certainly the story that has been given to us has problems.